The Mostly Peaceful Podcast continues, Part 3. For the listener, no time will have passed. Unless you took a break between parts, I guess.
I mean, it's probably a good break point, but
Yeah. So, we've covered most of the international affairs stuff. Let's move on to the major shaping events that are still in popular consciousness. These are less abstract or swept under the rug as these other ones. All the other stuff we just talked about has pretty much been forgotten about by the general public, and we had to do some brain tugging to remember the specifics we did remember, and I'm not entirely confident on all of them we did because so much stuff has happened since then. But thankfully, from here on, we have very specific events to talk about that will make getting through this way, way easier. So,
well, it doesn't make collecting information on a lot of these topics that easy, though.
yeah. So, the first thing we need to talk about that is a lie that is being perpetuated nonstop by the left ever since it happened. In Charlottesville, I do not remember the context. I think it was over a stupid statue.
It was a scenario of a statue of probably a Confederate general. I think it
Yeah.
was one of those.
I think it was
there
Robert
was
E. Lee.
there were two factions. There was one faction which said, "Oh well, we don't want to honor this guy anymore, so we should get rid of the statue to him." And the other faction said, "It's a historical monument. You don't just get rid of historical monuments because you changed your mind." Both you can make an argument for either side.
Yes.
Unfortunately, this was also the excuse that was used by a faction of white supremacists to basically show up and make a scene, pretty much. It was just basically cringy behavior, to be quite honest. And they're marching along with tiki torches, which I think is hilarious. Like, they have any idea how comical that is.
Yeah.
But
Not doing your purported ideology very, very proud there, marching around with tiki torches.
yeah, that's just pure cringe. But quite aside from the cringiness of it, there were people there who would identify as white supremacists, although not everybody, even amongst their faction, because this was a thing that they were calling the Unite the Right rally, I think they were calling it. And it was basically they were attempting the white nationalist faction therein was attempting to basically mix and mingle with the other right-wing factions and make common cause with them, because for a lot of the people who sort of fall into the white nationalist ideology do so by way of a distorted patriotism.
Yeah,
that's how they get there, and so they don't actually see anything strange about trying to make common cause with the rest of the right. Because they don't. The thing with white supremacists is that these days most of the people, I don't want to say most of the people tarred with that brush, because a lot of people get tarred with that brush regardless of what they think, but a lot of the people who fall into that way of thinking, they don't intellectualize it as, oh, white people are better than black people. They use the older standard of, oh, separate but equal, if you remember that phrase.
Yeah, the thing that ironically the left is enforcing nowadays, or trying to.
It's their core ideology these days. I mean, amongst the reasons why Richard Spencer is endorsing Joe Biden this year. But so there are a mixture of people along the spectrum, from patriotism to white supremacy to outright neo-Nazism, involved in this little charade. And as is always the case with these things, a counter-protest was arranged by the radical leftists, the ones who basically think that all white people are intrinsically racist and therefore they need to be kept in check by their bravery, etc.
And now it's important to note, given the current culture, while they were incredibly radical left, and I think there were some violence or vandalism going on at the time. It was not anywhere near the levels we'll talk about when we get to 2020.
Yeah, this was still, believe it or not, at a relatively low ebb for the purposes of the of the administration and the way the insanity has progressed over the course of time. But
And
yeah, so they arranged this, and in order, whether malevolently or not, I'm tempted to believe that there was a certain amount of malice involved. The Despite the fact that even the white supremacists had authorization to be there after a fashion, like they were part of a group, because Unite the Right wasn't a white supremacist movement, it was a big tent movement which just some white supremacists just happened to be a part of. They had managed to get their permit to be there, as I understand it. But when the Antifa types showed up, they were granted a permit to protest at the exact same time.
yeah,
The purpose of protest permits is to ensure that this doesn't happen.
yeah,
So, well,
to
twofold. It's a twofold purpose. Number one, to make sure you don't double book on the protest, and number two, to make sure that the cops know that there's going to be a protest taking place and that it isn't actually, in isn't actually in advance declared to be the purpose of civil disobedience or whatever. But yeah, so there was a situation which was set up to be a powder keg, and the authorities of the city had the police stand back rather than intervening when things started to get violent. But so there are several protests and movements taking place here. The first one is a protest counter protest specifically on the topic of the statue and the historical value thereof, and the protest counter protest of the Unite the Right people and the Antifa people.
yep,
So
and
there's a whole convergence of a whole bunch of different views, which has been rigorously conflated with each other by the media.
so the media hyped this thing up before anything even happened. It was clearly, it has all the stink of a glowy setup, because honestly, you don't give permit protest permits to two ideologically opposed groups and not expect something to happen.
Yeah, it's sort of the natural conclusion. But as we know now, Antifa is just an idea. So
According to Nadler, they don't even exist. But it's just a buzzword in theory being thrown around Washington D.C. Obviously, but no, we joke. They are very much so a problem and real. And yeah, so throughout this, it got very heated. Both sides got in each other's face, screaming a lot. There's videos all over the internet of it. And at some point, somebody drove a car into the Antifa dudes. Either, I don't know, remember off the top of my head if it was on purpose or not.
it was one of the Antifa guys an M4, I think, and threatened the guy with it, and he drove off in a panic, and he hit a woman who was with the Antifa protesters, who I believe died of a heart attack.
Yeah, that sounds right. It's been a very long time since this happened. 2 years is a very long time these days, but it's been.
It's like how it's one of those situations where I believe, and this is something that I heard from a friend who was following the story as it developed. I heard that the coroner found that she had died of a heart attack, but because the media never covered it as such, it was just considered to be a white supremacist murder.
So,
But the guy had been threatened with a firearm, and he was fleeing. That's what I understood to be the case.
so this is all God's way of foreshadowing what's coming up, because in microcosm, it's a small scale, low stakes version of what happens later, a couple years down the road. And this, of course, because we didn't have daily riots at this point, that Trump decided to give a address to it, as did many public figures and politicians, even international ones for some dang reason. And during his address, President Trump said, while attempting to address the idea of the discussion about the statue, there were that both sides had very fine people on them. But immediately afterwards, his next sentence is something along the lines of, "And I'm not talking about the white supremacists."
That's only part of the story. He actually decried white supremacists and neo-Nazis both before and after the very fine people line, as I recall. I
Yeah.
could be wrong about that. But there is no way that anybody who had viewed the speech in good faith could possibly, no matter how inattentive or idiotic they were, come across come away with the impression that he was endorsing white supremacy or neo-Nazis, or even failing to denounce them. It was so abundantly clear that there is actually no feasible way he could have been more clear.
Yeah, and both before and many times afterwards since, because the left is obsessed with getting the right to denounce people. He has denounced white supremacy. He was a little waffly on it at first. He's like, I'll just take whoever votes for me, votes for me. But eventually he figured out that you have to play that game, otherwise you cannot get decent positive airtime. Not that he gets much of that from the mainstream media to begin with, and certainly almost none of it, but he eventually started playing a bit more of that game. But at first he was a little more waffly in the primaries and early general. But he jumped on it pretty quick and started denouncing white supremacy on the regular. I think we have about 7 or 8 instances on camera.
Including David Duke specifically, who they keep asking him about for some reason.
Yeah, it's like, I think he knew him at some point or something, or met him.
No, I think it was just that David Duke endorsed him.
Oh, then sure. Yeah,
because an endorsement makes someone your bosom buddy, right? That's how it works.
Yeah. And I can understand Trump's reaction to a lot of it. He's like, I don't know who these people are. I don't know if they really believe. You could be lying to me. That would be my response if I was being honest. But that wouldn't get you anywhere if you're playing in politics, because other people will just believe the media before you.
And this seems to be one of those situations where, for whatever reason, the Shapiro seems to think that it would be a good time to side with the media.
Yeah, Shapiro. This is the reason.
This is the word footsie gets used a lot.
Yeah. Playing footsies with white supremacists, according to Ben. This is why I developed a strong dislike of Ben. This very issue. Because it shows just how he has to use this to show his never-Trumper supporters that he's totally still on board with them and their opinions about Trump, even though he's trying to support all of Trump's policies. And it just made Ben very disingenuous to me and made him come off as icky forever and put him at the bottom of my watch list, even below the Beanie Man.
I don't know if I'm quite willing to commit to putting him below the Beanie Man.
But this was just offensive because of the way the left took it and ran with it. And the lies spread everywhere. I was reading the web novel Worm at the time and was following a podcast that talked about each chapter, and one of the I had to quit listening to it because one of the hosts had a total chimp out about what his president said that particular week with their very fine people on both sides, and he got completely blasted for it, number one, and number two, it was not just him or that one podcast. This was all over the place. The left took this narrative and ran with it, and it has been one of their better gaslighting ops because it was so pervasive and hit everywhere.
This is one of those things that really made me. It really made me not. It's not so like I had any faith left in the media, but it made me lose faith in humanity. Like the willingness with people, which people would accept something that is a known lie.
Yeah, it just shows.
And I think the case in point for the whole thing is really that debate moderator,
Chris Wallace,
that we just saw. Yeah, he knows that it's not true. He knows it.
Mm-hmm.
He is not under any illusions that the very fine people narrative is in any way reflective of the truth. There's no doubt in my mind that he knows the full story. He's not fooled by any of it, but he still chose to engage the way he did. He chose that because he's a partisan.
Yep, and it showed several things and made them abundantly clear to the public. Number one, how politically divided ideologically our country is, and that divide is probably not reconcilable unless one side completely collapses. And we have a reorganic split happen after we become a single party because one just falls apart. The other thing it showed is just how badly to everybody, and I mean most people that follow politics fairly well on the internet knew how bad the media corruption was at this point, but the normie didn't know. The normie person that sees the occasional Facebook post didn't know, and they believed this for the most part for a while. But after some time passed, I noticed a very strong shift from these same people that started to. It was like light bulbs were going on in their head. That like, oh, the media is completely just totally corrupt. They're all liars. Nothing they say is true. They are the actual enemy of the people.
The time where the very fine people narrative was brought up that preceded the debate, because it comes and goes. The time before the debate, the previous time I'd heard it brought up, I remember just face palming because I remember hearing it about not one but several journalists had discovered for the first time that the narrative wasn't true because they just happened to this time investigate it. These are journalists.
Yeah, and I think you have a KMAC to thank for that because uh, I don't have a specific section for Kaylee McEnany. I don't think in this, so I'll bring her up now because she's not a major important figure, but one that's worth noting exists.
I kind of wish she was a major important figure.
So I adore K-Mac, and so does most of the strong red-blooded conservative right, because A, she's really pretty, and B, she's blonde, and C, she does not have press briefings, she has press beatings, where she shreds these people for their lack of ability to do their job.
Yeah, I know Claven's got a thing that he says about it. I can't remember. It's something about her being the girl from Species who tears out middle-aged men's spines or something like
Yeah,
that.
he updates it every time. He had her a Valkyrie one time, descending uh, from the heavens. He had her as an angel one time. He keeps changing it to embellish her with some kind of fictional something or other. But yeah, and she said to some journo and said he was pulling the very fine people thing at her, and she goes, "Okay, what's the rest of the quote?" And he goes, I don't know. I don't have the rest of the quote here. And she pulls it out of her binder and reads it to him.
She's very prepared with that binder. They seem to have an almost superstitious hatred of that binder at this
Oh,
point.
it was hilarious when they took a picture of it and saw the tabs. They all rushed to print it right away because nobody apparently got the tabs of her binder in a picture before. And they printed it the day they got it. And it was like right after the Goya Foods thing happened. And it showed the tabs and they were all just regular topics. And so you saw the left evolve into conspiracy theories about what each one actually meant and what was inside of each one. It was really funny when it happened. So yeah.
Like, do you guys not put tabs in your binder? Like,
Like
is that just not a thing in the media?
her job is to confront the media about what they're saying and answer questions about what they've in relation to what they've said. Of course, she has a binder full of media articles and references so she can pull stuff accurately. Duh, that's called doing a good job.
Well, they wouldn't know anything about that.
Yeah, they're too lazy for that. So anyway, this unfortunately needed to demand a lot of our time because it is still going today, as we saw during the debates, and people still believe it. Well,
this frustrates me so much because I know that what's his name? Oh, I can't remember his name. The moderator,
Chris Wallace.
Chris Wallace. I know Chris Wallace doesn't think that it's true. There's no way he thinks that it's true.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
And there's no way that Biden thinks that it's true either.
Yeah, well, the debate itself has a whole lot of stuff to read into it, even though it's not exactly what we thought it was, that shows just how bad the lies are.
Now, I know that everybody is pretty much on board that the media are dishonest and corrupt, but I think that a lot of people by the very fine people scam are going to be onboarded to the idea that the media are not just corrupt, but they are also gaslighting.
Yeah, I think this is a case where while they did get a successful narrative, I think they played themselves because people are aware of how bad their lies are now after the very fine people scam, and the more people find out about it, the easier it is. This, along with something I didn't mention that I'll bring up briefly, the Covington kid.
My goodness.
Next.
So the story was that a group of kids from Covington Catholic School had bust into a pro-life rally.
Yeah. I think it was in DC.
Was it the March for Life or anything like that? I don't remember which one it was. I know it was a pro-life event.
I think it was. I'll triple check while you talk about it. You can,
because I never know when the March for Life happens because the media refuses to cover it for whatever reason. Cough, cough. So he was there, and because it's a collection of individuals who all follow a particular who all have a particular point of belief in common, and it's a point of principle that is heavily opposed by a number of groups, and you can guarantee certain groups are going to turn up on the pro-choice side of the pro-life side of the ledger. So all the other people, when they need some targets to protest against, they know that they can find them there. And amongst these are all of radical leftists and the Black Hebrew Israelites and all the
Yes, it
kooks in
was
that case.
it was the March for Life in Washington D.C.
Right. So all of the kooks and weirdos on the left just show up for this thing, and so basically the kids had been pretty thoroughly briefed on what constituted appropriate behavior in this setting. Like anybody who remembers going on a school trip knows they know what it's like when the teacher gives you a lengthy dissertation on what is expected of your level of behavior when you're
And
out and about in public.
and they knew they were attending a controversial rally to begin with, and given that it's a private Catholic school, I think the teachers were even more aware of it and gave the kids a very thorough talking to, because none of them acted out. And
Yeah,
uh,
they're
and
all very well behaved from
this
all
was
accounts.
this was before the riots, but after Charlottesville, so tensions were ratcheting. So we knew confrontations will happen at these things. So it was very reasonable to say the teachers just kind of told them, you're probably going to have people get in your face, or you're very likely to. This is how you react. You don't say anything. You just stand there and smile.
And so that's what he did. And he stood there as he was provoked and harassed and accosted by all of the lunatics that had shown up to oppose them.
And I remember the day this happened. The Black Hebrew Israelites were out in force in Atlanta, of all freaking places. And I remember complaining to you about it, that they were blocking traffic for some reason and were rallied up and fired up for this thing. Turns out they were a big part of the instigation of this thing. And you also had Native Americans here for some reason, and Native American activist groups at the March for Life, of all things. So every activist group was out there. But the important one is the Native American ones.
Yeah, so the Native American guy who he went on to portray himself as being a veteran at one point, I believe.
Yeah, his name's Nathan Phillips, also known as
Yeah,
Skyman, I think.
he strikes me as kind of a scumbag. Like I don't know
He's a
whether he really is
professional
or not.
protester, effectively. From what I've read of his history, he is just a professional activist and protester.
Right. Well, at any rate, I'm not particularly impressed by him, that's for sure. And he basically he rolled up in these kids' faces and just started beating his drum in their face and whatnot. The actual story of what happened is not very interesting,
Yeah, it's
as
just.
with a lot of these things. But what happened, rather than the actual story of a bunch of kids standing there and stoically avoiding being provoked while they tried everything they could to get a rise out of them, and then the kids just basically they waited it out and they left peacefully. What instead happened is that the media decided to grab a photo op and then spin their own story about what happened.
And by story, we mean blatant fiction, lies, not true, complete falsehoods.
Yeah.
It,
So the story, as it was reported in the media by all of the mainstream media, without exception, and the story which was immediately believed by the majority of conservative ink, was that, oh well, these kids were basically tormenting and obstructing this brave Native American elder who was there protesting peacefully and not doing anything wrong, and they basically surrounded him and stood over him and leered at him and prevented him from moving around and generally made a nuisance of themselves, all while smirking and wearing their MAGA hats.
and this narrative lasted for a whole 48 hours before things changed.
I'm not sure if if I'm impressed at how long it was or impressed at how short it was,
It
given
was.
how shallow the story was.
Yeah. So for 48 hours, this narrative was repeated that these Catholic boys in these MAGA hats were just sitting there harassing these poor Indians, and they were protesting and getting back at them by beating their drum in their face, and they were just sitting there smirking and laughing at them, these horrible, horrible Catholic kids. Well, the name of the Covington Catholic kid, by the way, is Nick Sandman. And that name may ring a bell a bit harder than Covington Kid these days because of what followed.
Because he's now the single wealthiest child in the United States.
Yeah. So what the what he did was he got, I think his name's Lynn Wood, the one of the biggest free speech and anti-left lawyers in the U.S. to come represent him in a defamation case for libel, slander, and defamation. I think against CNN, WAPO, every news outlet except for Fox, basically. And he took them to court. And until this settlement came back, I was really worried because this is where faith in the current era would completely die if Nick Sandman lost this. The American way of beliefs would have been proven to be tenuous at best and needing to be better protected or untenable if this did not survive. But he took him to court and he won. And he didn't win just a little bit. The dude won, double-digit millions of dollars and is looking to win them from everybody from the way the court cases are going.
From what I've heard, there's a bunch of dismissals just recently got turned down by the courts.
Yep, in the appeals court, and it looked like it was going to be dismissed all over the place. But the appeals court managed to get the court to have to rehear the whole dang thing because they apparently hit a good appeals judge who's just like, this is all BS. These people.
Well, I mean, the thing is, Linwood is not famous because he's bad at his job, and this case is basically a slam dunk, because this kid lost his future over this. Like he was getting ready to go to university, and he had his application declined specifically, and they admitted it because of this.
And what's more, after Lynn Wood threatened to sue the university, they had to take it back. And for some reason, I think Nick Sandman's still young and he made a mistake still going there. But they said, we're going to closely monitor him. And one of his teachers or his professors came out and said he'd be on the lookout for any kind of white nationalist inclinations being displayed by Nick Sandman. Like, the dude was just a freaking 17-year-old Catholic kid standing at a rally with his school/church. And he literally didn't do nothing.
That only really goes to show that the term white nationalist doesn't actually refer to anything anymore.
And oh my goodness, if he had not won these cases and blown it out publicly forever, he would be stuck in the job market as the racist white supremacist that wore the MAGA hat.
That's why his settlements are so large, because the settlement is the means by which the court repairs damage done. Yeah, that's the only means at their disposal, as and Nick Ricade is so fond of saying. And so, if it's going to cost a 17-year-old kid his entire professional future, well, you've got to pay out to him all of the prospective earnings that he had the potential to make over the course of a lifetime.
Yep, because so many job doors close to you when the media smears you like this.
And it doesn't matter that that has been found to have been slander either. If anyone who I think was inclined to treat him as a white supremacist and refused to employ him is still going to.
Yeah. Anybody on the left will not hire this guy. So that's basically half the country he's cut off from ever working for them. Regardless of how explicit their ideology infects their workplace, he can't work for them. They just won't hire him. His name's too big, been spread around the media outlets, and unless the news cycle continues to move at the pace it's going, he's going to be in it for a while. And people are not going to forget about him. So, he had to win this case. There was no way for free speech to continue if he did not win this case. And thankfully, he didn't just win this case, he ran these people over. All these news organizations got handed their butts by Lynn Wood in court, and he is more than Nick Sandman getting the money and being repaid for this. The important takeaway here is this hurt these media companies and showed they still can be caught and harmed financially in big ways. While they have effectively unlimited dollars, that big of a paycheck is like more than several of their anchor's salary combined because they didn't do their job. So you notice they're being a little less brazen about attacking individuals like that now.
No, they're not. That's why Lynn Wood is now employed by the Kenosha Kid.
Oh well, he's a there's more circumstances around him specifically that make that worth talking about. And yeah, I think it'll be a similar story because I think they've forgotten and are trying to play a different game with that.
Well, that just means that they didn't learn their lesson very well, doesn't it?
No, but we'll get to St. Kyle the Kenosha Kid when we get to 2020 in late 2020 at that. So, yeah, that's the extent of the media lies. They blatantly lied about this kid, said he was all kinds of isms and supremacists, and that he was just a horrible, evil little person, and they got raked over the coals for it. And it was a very, very public raking. And I think this did a lot to galvanize the later half of Trump's presidency after these lawsuits started coming back more positive, and the name started getting around and the story started spreading, because it really showed that we still had some fight left in us and could win.
And also that the media establishment are a bunch of scumbags. And anybody who hadn't twigged at that point is going to twig now.
Yeah, if they didn't...
The thing is that the more that they beclown themselves, the less support that they have.
Yeah.
Like, if they lose their airport contract, who's going to watch CNN?
At the start of Trump's presidency, despite all the bad predictions, liberal faith in the media was somewhere around 80%, and conservative support was somewhere around 30%. And that has tanked to half the number on each by the end of his. He has done such a good job at dismantling the credibility of the media, not through any action of himself, but just, well, a little bit. He baits them. But because they beclown themselves by playing into the bait, whether it's dropped directly by Trump or somebody that supports Trump, they just keep getting themselves thrown or caught out as liars. And people don't trust them anymore, because the more you lie, the less credibility you have. You know, it used to be, if you were a liar, you were branded a liar for basically the rest of your life, and keeping your word was important. Now it's the opposite. You have to be proven truthful to be given a badge of honor and labeled as trustworthy, because people lie so much, especially people in the media.
But whether or not you get your badge of honor doesn't actually have anything to do with whether or not you're truthful. That's the problem. Because those badges are only handed out by the powers that be.
Yeah.
That's why everything that Joe Biden no matter how mutually contradictory to other things that he says, is considered to be the truth.
Yep. So yeah, we spent more time on this than I thought we would, so we'll move on to the next big topic. This is a pretty big one. I don't know if we'll spend much time on it despite its size, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. But it invaded the news cycle for so long, and started all the way back, I think in early 2017, maybe late 20... Yeah, it's like as soon as Trump was inaugurated and came down the escalator, they started ops for this. And this was Marussia. The Russia investigation.
He's Putin's puppet.
Yeah. So the first thing that we talked about earlier, when we talked about the election night giving us a clear indication of things coming up, and the tone being set when the left wouldn't accept the results of the election, this is it being demonstrated on full display for the entire world in a clown fiesta called the Russia investigation. Millions of taxpayer dollars wasted. Oppo done by Crossfire Hurricane with a collaboration between the FBI and select informants, as well as other agencies and individuals in government and not, to find information about Trump working with Putin with no reason except for he must be because reasons.
Well, we know what it was about, though.
Yeah,
because the Strzok texts and emails came out saying that this was there was a faction of individuals within the FBI who intended to dethrone the president.
Yeah, and so this was all BS. It was a attempted coup and hit job on President Trump. It was a political hit job. And Trump weathered it fairly well, all things considered. Like, it could have gone a lot worse. But it still ate all of our news cycle, like, at least once every other week. Half of the week would be about Marussia, or some big Marussia hearing. And first, there was Mueller. Mueller was sent to investigate Trump, and headed the special task force for this investigation in the FBI. I think it was the FBI. And the left's fangirling for Mueller was hilarious. For
But
the
Aristile all the time.
I know the t-shirts are it's Mueller time t-shirts were all over the place with a pic
Such cringe, my goodness.
in various flavors. It had some had his face on them, some had him holding a Miller Lite. Like holy crap!
Even if you were on the side of people who hate Donald Trump and think that he was a corrupt Russian puppet or whatever, how do you not see that that is so cringe?
I do not know. So it went on forever with them presenting BS after BS, and it all doesn't matter. So we're not going to waste too much time getting into super specifics about what they quote found, because it all turned out to be lies. Come from somebody heard somebody say something while they were drunk at a bar one time that maybe this might happen is the best solid information we're fairly certain is true. That somebody heard some drunk guy at a bar mumble something while he was absolutely wasted.
Well, I've heard that guy eventually said, "Well, no, that was all bar talk. I didn't expect them to actually use it in a dossier."
Yeah. So, and we have all
Nobody's
kinds.
ever told a tall tale over a beer at the bar before.
Yeah, like it happens when you're totally wasted. You will sometimes bend the truth because your brain can't process what actually happened. So you may have to make it up and correct yourself later. Like this literally happens all the time. For some reason, I have Adam Schiff listed in the notes for here. I think he comes up in Ukraine.
But yeah, so the Steele dossier was a piece of Oppo research paid for by Hillary Clinton's campaign committee, which that should have been enough by itself to dismiss it from being from being really valuable evidence in any way of anything. But yeah, not so much. Apparently, it's the most crucial thing ever, and everybody needs to pay attention to it.
Yeah, despite its obviously partisan origin and despite the dubious nature of all the information in it, it was paraded around by Rachel Maddow, MSNBC, all the CNN, all the lefty outlets as "we got him now." This was the first big "we got Trump this time" moment that
Yeah.
it was broadcast, and there will be many more throughout his presidency. But this was the first one that really hit the national stage big time.
Rachel Maddow is such a tragic case. She was so invested in Trump Russia, so invested. It was her entire life was to report on Trump Russia, and it's turned out to be a scam. And I think that in most cases, Maddow is a true believer.
Yeah, I do as well.
I don't think she's a cynic. I think she's a true believer.
She is
She's
not. She is
so
not a
bad.
Pelosi. She is a definite useful idiot, true believer of the cause.
Yeah, I think that's actually pretty evident in a lot of things that she says, like the fact that she was the first big media personality on the left to come out and say that she wishes the president and the first lady the best fortunes in recovering from the virus. Like she didn't stop to gloat the way virtually everyone else on her side of the aisle did.
Yeah. To be fair, the right, myself included, did do a little bit of grave dancing later, or right before the recent news stories broke. So I may not have the best ground to stand on there, but yeah. So the Crossfire Hurricane and Steele dossier are where all the information comes from, but what resulted from the methods of information being acquired, the people who were running this were so confident that they could get something to stick. They would find something tangible on Trump because everybody in politics is corrupt, and forgetting that Trump is a businessman, not a politician, they assumed there'd be something they could get to stick. They couldn't. So the FBI's corruption at the end of this was completely exposed after years of investigations into the investigation. And as we mentioned before, there was a whole group of them just trying to out President Trump. And this included doing things like altering emails to say the exact, and statements to say the exact opposite of what they did. That's the one guy they've caught right now and have announced they've caught. I forget his name. And he's being charged and probably being used as a caught fish to find the bigger fish in the pond that were caught up in this and get evidence to bring them in. I hope. Barr, don't let me down here. I'm really starting to doubt you, buddy. And we also, I forget the method through which this happened, but we found out that Obama wiretapped Trump's campaign and spied on it. Pretty
Yeah, I don't remember
explicitly.
how it was revealed either, but I remember it was incontrovertible.
Yeah, I remember sincerely believing what I read as though it was vetted enough for it to be believable without too much extra research, and barely did any because it was just so blatant. So I'm fairly certain that that's 100%, even though I don't remember the specifics, although y'all are free to fact check me on that if you've got alternative information. And yeah, this is a big deal because this is what we impeached Nixon for. This is why Ford couldn't win his second term, is because he pardoned Nixon for doing this. And it paints the clearest, for those of us that follow history, it is another example of the double standard, but in bright neon lights for the left and the right in the U.S.
If I recall correctly, weren't both Biden and Obama implicated in this, like
Yes,
personally?
very much so. They have all but been proven to know what happened as individually and okayed it.
Put a signature on it or something.
Some
I remember
on some document related to it, at least. Yeah, I think we have Biden's signature on something.
It was on like illegitimate Pfizer warrant or some.
Yeah,
warrant.
they did FISA jumping by catching some guy associated with some guy that was associated with Trump and used that as justification for the most extensive spying campaign on his campaign that you've ever seen. And it like so when Nixon got impeached, he got impeached because he listened in on one meeting with tapes, with wiretap tapes in the for the opponent's research to get oppo research done on them. Obama was basically had a direct line of the Trump campaign the entire time because of those FISA warrants, and could feed that information to the Democrat Party. That's miles worse than what Nixon did. If Nixon is a tugboat, then Obamacare is a full cruise ship, or not Obamacare. Then Obamagate is a full cruise ship. And this is what this controversy will become later when it came out in early 2020, I think, is called Obamagate, and just how stuck into this Russia impeachment coup the Obama administration was, and Obama himself. And you'll probably see more developments with this if Trump gets reelected. We desperately need him to preserve the integrity of our national offices, because people need to go to jail over this. If we are impeaching presidents because they listened to a campaign tape once, then we need to do something to put people in handcuffs for spying on a campaign for its entire duration on bogus charges.
Yeah, everybody's was anxious about that because they were, and the common line trotted out is that, oh, you don't want to put your political rivals in prison, you don't want that image. But
the traitors,
at some point, if somebody has definitively enough broken the law, they're just a lawbreaker. It's not really a good reason to not punish them for that.
yeah, and this has been a big worry for me, is that we are not seeing our politicians be held to the same standard as other individuals, and it's always been the case like that, right? But it is so egregious in this case, with the double standard especially, not just between elites and the common folk, as it normally is, but between political parties, when you compare it to the stuff that happened with Nixon, that I don't see a way you can keep the integrity of the FBI or any federal investigation agency if they do not put people in handcuffs for this. And I mean a lot of people. Every single name that was on that email list needs to be in prison for at least 20 years or more.
Yeah, and as much as you don't want to be putting your political rivals in prison, likewise, you cannot suffer this type of thing to take place.
Yeah, there is a line. And once Trump doesn't have to worry about being reelected anymore, I hope he tells Barr to cut loose and throw people in jail.
It'll be locker up time.
Yeah, and this is the unfortunate nature of the two-term presidency stuff we have in the U.S., where you can only serve for 2 terms, 4 years each if you're president. Where the first term you're not allowed to make your big plays because you got to win re-election, and when you don't have to worry about it, and you can let your successor say, "Oh, don't worry, I won't do that during the primaries," if he really wants to win back public appeal because it plays bad, you can't do that until your second term. Because if you try to do it during your first term, it's going to be used against you during your re-election. But once you don't got to run anymore, it's your successor's problem. They can figure it out, and people are generally much more willing to cut loose then. And these are things that need to happen. And honestly, I think Trump is isolated enough from the traditional GOP Republican neocon types that I don't think it'll have any blowback on the Republican Party as a whole. Whatever Trump does during his second term, no matter how ridiculous it is, because whoever comes up will be not Trump. They may be inspired by Trump or grow a lion's mane like Ted Cruz did if he gets the nomination or something, but they're not going to be Trump, so they will not have the stigma. So yeah, next, the Kavanaugh hearings.
Oh, this was another one of those things that just showed to the people what the Democrats were capable of.
Yeah, and it showed just how far they were willing to take it to try and preserve their political power. I think more than anything else, because for those of you that are politically literate and read a lot, I assume you are if you're listening to a 4+ hour podcast about the entirety of the last 4 years, this should show you just how corrupt these people are. It should show you that they are willing to do anything to keep power. That they do not care what they have to say or do, or who they have to drag through the mud, or what ridiculous accusations they have to level. They're going to do everything they can to make things either as uncomfortable for the opposition if they are in power, or try and throw them out if they can. We'll see this repeated later, 2 topics down from this. But yeah, so Brett Kavanaugh, he was the one.
So who was the retiree? Who was the retiree this time?
I don't have that handy. Brett Kavanaugh. And while I'm looking, by the way, they did a very similar but more race-based thing. Oh no, it was actually sexual allegations too with Clarence Thomas, the black Supreme Court justice from Georgia that is the best Supreme Court justice I know.
Yeah. But I agree he's the best Supreme Court justice. But
Anthony Kennedy so he succeeded.
In his case, that I found that one funny because his response to the way they treated him at his hearing was to accuse them of being racists, and you could just see
the color drain.
There's the betrayed look on their faces, like,
especially
you can't say
Biden.
That's our thing.
Especially Biden. He was chairing that hearing, I'm pretty sure.
Well, I think that Biden, it probably hit home for Biden because I do sincerely believe that Biden is an old school racist. Like he's like your classic Jim Crow style racist.
I don't.
He's pretty on the down low about it, but everything he says about black people specifically, I don't think he really cares about other races, mainly just black people. But I think that from the stuff that he says, he just doesn't view them as full people, autonomous people. He seems to view them as children.
To the Biden gaff wheel, we have a whole chart. Let's see. Let's go with which one is appropriate. Poor kids are just as talented as white kids.
Yeah, so I think he's got that sort of like paternalistic, low expectations bigotry when it comes to black people. Yeah. So I think that was why he looked so poleaxed by being actually accused of being a racist, because his self-image is not a racist, while being a racist is entirely based on him being on the left.
Yeah, I think a lot of lefties fall into this cognitive dissonance of they built their whole identity around being anti-racist, but they are at their core racist, and whether they acknowledge it consciously or not, they know it somewhere. Yeah, so
they're being left-wing, they're being Democrats, they're being progressives. That's their get out of racism free ticket to them. That's why they cling to that way of thinking, is because if they stopped being a Democrat, they would actually have to face what they actually think.
Yep. So, and this Supreme Court hearing was the dirtiest we've ever seen. I don't remember much of Neil Gorsuch's. I remember the left giving a little pushback on it, but I don't think it was very much at all.
I think at that point they figured that they lost when they didn't ram through whoever
Yeah,
it was.
the real
Garland.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
I think it was Garland. But I think we might have done better with Garland, from what I understand of Gorsuch's rulings. But
No, Garland was an RBG.
oh, was he? Okay.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Yeah, okay then. I don't know much about him. So yeah, we have we have Brett Kavanaugh appointed after Anthony Kennedy. I think he retired. I don't think he died. I'm pretty sure he retired.
Yeah, I think he retired.
Yeah.
But he was one of the squish Republican picks, wasn't he?
Yeah. He was mostly conservative, I think, but he did squish a few times. So
yeah, I think he was one of the unreliable conservative votes.
Yeah,
but
he was one of the more unreliable ones from what I remember, but not the most.
So what makes the Supreme Court so contentious is Roe v. Wade ultimately.
Yeah,
that's the reason, and the reason being that Roe v. Wade was a bad decision, and everyone knows it. Like from a judicial perspective, before you even take the moral perspective into account, from a judicial perspective, it was an incredibly bad ruling, and the dissent is scathing, and frankly, much more coherent than the ruling, the document regarding the ruling, because it is a decision that is illegitimate in a lot of ways. Like it's got the legitimacy of efficacy, but in terms of its actual conformance to constitution, it's not legitimate, and any coherent legal commentator would draw that conclusion. The only reason to rule in favor of Roe v. Wade is because you're a partisan. Period. End. It's because you're engaged in judicial activism.
And it was the first instance of the Supreme Court, more important than the actual abortion itself in terms of a political and legal standpoint, is what Roe v. Wade did to empower the judiciary branch by simply being ruled the way it was and not challenged by the other branches of government.
But it's because of that decision being illegitimate. That means that in order to maintain that power to make law from the bench with these illegitimate decisions used by a partisan court majority, they need to maintain that court majority, because the only way to maintain that legislation is to maintain a crooked court.
Yeah, and if you really want to get a better picture of it, read Rehnquist's dissent over the case. He wrote a very good one, from what I remember. I think it was Rehnquist, but yeah. So Roe v. Wade, more relevant to the entirety of the United States, sets the precedent where the judiciary can enact law by precedent in the court and make certain laws unenforceable. So what this did was it set it up so that the states had to conform their abortion rules around this ruling instead of being handed a piece of legislation from the legislative branches. So this gave the court way more power than it had before. And it was further expanded during the gay marriage case back in Obama's time in office. And this has made the courts a huge deal. For just to put this into perspective, if the court rules in favor of a lawsuit, regardless of the legality of that lawsuit, and that lawsuit is claiming that somebody has a right to do something, the entirety of the United States can no longer enforce a law reasonably that contradicts that ruling, because that ruling can be cited as precedent in every court from the Supreme Court down. That's every court in the U.S. and get money out of the state if they try. So you can do things like enact LGBT marriage rights and say the whole U.S. has to follow them, because if the state refuses, they can cite the Supreme Court ruling. The offended party can cite the Supreme Court ruling in their lawsuit against the state, and the state has to pay the offended party money, because the judge is probably going to have to agree with the Supreme Court if they want to keep the integrity and structure of the courts in place. So this is why Supreme Court judges became very, very, very important post Roe v. Wade. Until Roe v. Wade, they didn't really matter, to be completely honest.
Well, they were the final court of appeal, but they were just supposed to be, ruling on constitutional things. They weren't in the business of making law.
Yeah, this effectively gave the judiciary unspoken legislative powers, and so it's what
I'm pretty sure that the separation of powers is not really being held up in this case.
I'm pretty sure the whole point of building our government the way it is was to specifically avoid this. So that's important and will be important for several topics later. Let's get into the Kavanaugh hearing itself. Christine Blasey Ford was the primary person that the left dug up, literally dug up.
What a witch! Like, talk about a mercenary.
So she accuses Kavanaugh first of raping her, then gang raping her, then gang raping her at a party with his friends, and the lie just continues to build, and it gets ridiculous. Truly ridiculous.
And when we say ridiculous, we don't mean absurd in scope. We mean it's actually so stupid that there's no reason why anybody would believe it to begin with. It's because it is quite literally unreasonable.
But the left in their delusions right now bought it hook, line, and sinker.
I'm not sure whether or not they did. I can't tell.
I think the general public did. Because they were giving full throat to support to a clearly crazy woman.
I don't believe that the actual the Democrat establishment believed it.
I'm not sure they did either.
I think that they knew that she was a useful tool and an agent, and that they had coinciding interests because Blasey Ford has investment in abortion drugs, and the Democrats want to preserve Roe v. Wade. So
yeah. So what happened was with Kavanaugh was he went through this whole song and dance, and the lie got exposed, and it finally got exposed completely with her friend coming out and saying, "Yeah, that party she's accusing Kavanaugh of doing all this stuff at, pretty sure we didn't even go. I think there was a party that day, but we didn't go anywhere." And
no one in the entire course of the trial was able to demonstrate that she had ever met Kavanaugh.
Yeah, and this was.
It was quite literally a case of you have never seen them in the same place at the same time.
Yes.
Nobody had, ever.
So, this whole debacle was so toxic and so mean-spirited towards Kavanaugh, who before all this gave the impression of a fairly squished justice that everybody was worried about on the conservative end, but this seems to have locked him down a bit harder against the left after going through what they did to this poor man. Nobody should have to go through this.
Yeah, like his name was dragged through the mud at great length and in excruciating detail. He and his family were put under the worst kind of media scrutiny. That is to say, under scrutiny by a media who have no interest in the truth.
Yeah.
And there's no restitution for that, because it was all allegedly done in the name of protecting the interests of the American people. And so he will never see any compensation for that. This is going to be one of those cases where the best revenge is living well. If he does a good job being a solid conservative judge on the court, that will be the most vicious blow he can strike to his detractors.
Yeah, because
they want a crooked judge. So the best revenge is to be a straight one.
Yeah. So he's ruled bad on a few cases, I think, but they weren't. He's not nearly anywhere close to as bad as Gorsuch or something, from what I understand.
Yeah, Gorsuch has a wrong-headed philosophy to begin with, but I think that Kavanaugh's just kind of squishy.
Yeah. So, in general, this was a horrific thing to watch. I couldn't follow it while it was happening. I would check it at the end of every week to see if there was any updates, because this was horrible to watch this man go through. And I felt so bad for him and his family.
Well, I mean, it won some points for a few squishes, like Lindsey Graham managed to have a few legendary moments.
Yeah, a lot of squishy neocon types got off their butt when they finally realized just how bad it was, and the left is going to come after them with this kind of junk. And so that was helpful. But other than that, this was just a sad, horrible event to watch, and to see him accused of gang raping girls at a party that the girls never attended, and it's just it's total clown stuff that you
There are
wouldn't.
still people out there who seem to believe it.
Oh, I know. Like if you look at Twitter, every lefty woman in the world claims he's a rapist.
And this was, after all, one of the things that was this before or after Weinstein?
I don't know.
Because it was certainly got rolled into that whole
I
Me
think it was
Too thing.
around the same time.
And if I recall correctly, Kamala Harris went on the record saying that she 100% believed whatchamacallit,
Christine Blasey Ford, yeah. And this was after the confirmation, from what I remember. So, and she has not retracted it. So keep that in mind when you go to the ballot box. Next, because I really don't even like thinking about the Kavanaugh hearing. I didn't put it in here originally. It's just really gross.
Yeah, it was certainly grotesque, and I think that if anything, it's the main reason it's important was because it shows the lengths that they are willing to go to protect the crookedness of the court, because they know that what they have gained in terms of progressive legislation from the court was not gained legitimately.
Yeah. And they need the court to get these rulings and laws, or fake laws, and unenforceable standards passed, because they can't get any actual laws that pass the crap they want. Because on a nationwide level, the nation doesn't want this junk. California may want it, but they want to cram it down everybody else's throat. And they don't like that. They don't like that they cannot get this stuff through the legislative branch that are using the courts. And so they have a vested interest in chimping out whenever the court loses its mind.
Because he's got a habit of
Whenever
saying the quiet part out loud. You can actually see in a bunch of times when Biden talks about this, and Kamala Harris is even worse about this. They will actually refer to the Supreme Court as being necessary for passing legislation.
Yeah, there are plenty of examples of that from memory. I can't call any specific examples at the moment, but I remember seeing plenty of videos on it.
Which,
So,
believe it or not, is not the intended way it's supposed to be used.
yeah, no. Effectively, the Supreme Court was only supposed to be for heavily appealed, controversial cases that needed a ruling from a definitive authority figure, and for issues within the federal government itself that needed rulings in the court quickly. That's the whole point of the Supreme Court. It was supposed to do stuff like that, but it was never supposed to have the kind of power it does now. So next, I stuck Kavanaugh where I did in the list when I remembered him, because I wanted a happy topic after Kavanaugh. Space Force.
Space Force!
This is a legitimate happy story, because I was not a fan of Elon Musk at first. And Space Force being established and Elon Musk getting the space race back engaged and back on track is a real American story that just you don't hear very ever anymore, because the space race is over as far as most countries are concerned. But an American entrepreneur decided, I want to go to Mars. And so he reinvigorated spaceflight and came up with an idea to make it something that he could sell and build money on and continue development for by making reusable rockets, so that it's cheaper to send stuff into space and get people interested in space again. And this is just a really cool thing. And Trump said, heck yeah. And NASA got back up to speed and force after Trump helped him out a bit. And they launched a reusable rocket successfully and retrieved it.
So there's additional corollaries to this that I think I'm going to bring up at this point. That none of them cut counter to what you said. But I think that it's more than just a happy story in a lot of ways. There is a huge problem right now with the amount of territory being controlled in Africa by China. This means a huge amount of difficult to obtain rare earth metals. The methods of procuring them in volume are entirely in Chinese hands.
Yes.
The only way that the minerals market is going to be reset is when asteroid mining becomes a thing.
Yeah,
so the Western world needs to have a strong foothold in space before too long in order to ensure that we don't end up in a situation where Red China is controlling literally all the rare earth minerals that we have access to
Yeah,
as a collective species.
we're going to need more silicone at some point. We're going to need a whole lot of stuff. We're going to need precious metals for various reasons. Gold for transistors in electrical devices is still optimal in a lot of cases. There's a lot of stuff that China just has a really too strong a foothold over for the
There's
West.
particularly things like cobalt and the various
Yeah.
metals that you need in small amounts, but they're hard to get. That type of thing. But I suppose the one of the ironies of all of this is that the people who spend so much time, boring about the things that Donald Trump does, they should be all for this because they're all super keen on electrical cars and stuff.
Mm-hmm. And
And
Elon Musk was the guy that made Tesla, so
I'm not just talking about that it's Elon Musk. I'm also talking about the fact that the components required to produce those batteries, those high capacity batteries for electric cars, they need those metals.
yeah.
The cheaper that the United States can access those things, the more economical electric cars might become.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can move all of that mining process onto asteroids, you're also not despoiling the environment. So this should be a 110% win for Space Force with the greenies.
But they can't because Trump did it. And he did establish the United States Space Force, a separate division of the U.S. federal government exclusively for space and interstellar related activities.
Yep. Right. And in addition to this, like this is the sort of grand project that humanity sort of needs, particularly the Western world, to rally behind as a great goal to move us beyond our boundaries and into space, into the great beyond, for the sake of not just acquiring filthy lucre, but also for the sake of expanding our territory and our knowledge and understanding of the way the world functions. You would think that the science people would be totally in favor of this. This should have won them over easily, considering Obama had turned NASA into a Muslim appeasement outfit. That
Yeah,
was literally their job. Their job was to make sure Muslims didn't feel bad about the fact they've done nothing good for the world. Um, and Trump basically reset NASA's objectives to be, NASA objectives.
go to space, do stuff.
Yeah, space.
Yeah, and
Which is, you would think that science people would be all for that. As, oh yeah, we're getting back into space. We're going to be doing exploration and research and stuff. Like all of the things related to Space Force, they all seem like the generic lefty.jpg should have been 100% in favor of it from top to
well,
bottom, no reservations.
this should have been a rallying thing for all Americans because it hits both the left and the right for once. It
But
the
Orange Man bad,
but
Aristile.
Orange
Orange
Man
Man
Bad
bad.
is the only reason the left wasn't on board with this, and they didn't give the normal full throat hatred for it because I think in general, everybody likes to go to space.
Space.
But they still didn't support it, or in some cases did come down on it. Some media outlets did. I think WAPO wrote a pretty scathing article about it at some point. But I can't. I
Yeah, they
thought,
just sneered and scoffed and that. I mean, can you imagine how much they would have gushed if Obama had been the one to do it instead?
and yeah, and it hurts so much that the the fentanyl Floyd riots were going on right when the Dragon capsule launched. So that was a big deal.
Yeah, and it got completely drowned out by complete bullshit.
I watched it live. I didn't watch the Daily Wire stream because it was basically Jeremy boring the whole time. But I did watch it. Watch it live, and that was a cool thing to see. So I'm glad we're going back into space. I'm glad America has an entrepreneur in Elon Musk. Even if he is crazy, he's the fun kind of crazy that says things like "I want to make cat girls" and stuff, and builds flamethrowers and sells them for fun.
Yeah, I expect there are probably a lot of weebs that pin their hopes on him because he tends to actually do stuff when he says he's going to, which means that catgirls might not actually be off the docket.
So I'm not sure you want those. Can you imagine your
Yeah, I'm
furniture?
not sure you want them either, but since when was that a concern for Elon Musk?
That's true. So, so yeah, I have totally 180'd on my opinion of Musk from being fairly skeptical because mostly because he ran Tesla, and I wasn't a fan of what they represented without doing too much research. But him heading
I,
Space Force won a lot of points, like a ton of points, all the points, the best
I'm
points.
I'm still skeptical of a lot of his stuff. Like some of those things he suggests don't make much sense to me. Like his sort of vacuum pressurized pipes to put trains in type of thing that he's been doing. I can't make sense of how that could possibly work. But I mean, sometimes you need an entrepreneur to just try this crap out.
Yeah, I mean, though that's just the entrepreneur's mindset when and the innovator's mindset. They're just like, I don't know, I'll just try it and see what it does. I got an idea for
Yeah.
how it'll work. If it doesn't work, I'll get the same result by doing something a little different until we get something
Yeah,
to sell.
from what it looks like to me, that plan just typically is going to result in a large explosion and a lot of loss of life if it ever gets used. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe he's got plans. Maybe he's got a way. Maybe he's figured it out. There are a lot of smart people who want to work for them because, well, their smarts and their ingenuity has just been left to lie fallow for years.
Well, the old school traditional stereotype of an engineer dreams of working for something like old school NASA, and that hasn't existed basically since, good lord, before Obama. It was practically decommissioned. And with
Well,
Bush,
it was functionally decommissioned under Obama because it was racist to go to space. I guess
yeah,
is that how it works?
yeah, and now we not only have NASA back doing space stuff, but we have an innovator willing to help provide them with cheaper methods to get to space and help them spearhead their space exploration. So I'm excited to see what Space Force does in the future, assuming the apocalypse doesn't happen or something silly, which is looking more and more likely. But it's something to look forward to, something to be proud of as an American, because it feels very American to me, more than anything else that's happened during the last 4 years.
Is the bald eagle up on screen?
Yeah, I haven't taken him off. I haven't shown anything but the bald eagle all stream. So yeah, let's go ahead and do Peachments before we go to a break, and that'll cleanly cut us into 2020 after this next break.
All right, Peachments.
So the first thing you need to know about Peachments is the timeline, or the time that they ran into. Peachments ran in all the way, I think, until early February, in maybe longer, in 2020 from late 2019, and they consumed about 5 or 6 months. And so this
Colossal quantity of taxpayer money.
yeah, the more important thing is time and how that's going to be relevant when it comes to 2020 because of the way certain people responded to things in 2020. We'll save it for when we get there. And this is important. And remember, this was spearheaded by the Democrats. Now, first, Trump has a fairly innocuous international relations call that sounds like Trump talking to a foreign leader. Clavin read the transcript. I read the transcript myself. That's what it seemed like to me.
I'm vaguely familiar with it. I remember hearing it.
There was nothing in that thing that jumped out to me as, yeah, it's Peachments time. It was just a phone call, and it was I believe it was about aid to Ukraine over them fulfilling some end of a deal, which is the purview of the president in international relations, by the way.
It just honestly, the call sounded kind of boring to me.
Yeah, it sounded like totally normal international relations. I assumed every president did all the dang time, and they probably do.
If anything, it sounded a bit friendlier than I expected from a bland international relations call.
Yeah. So, the left, for some reason, decided this was a good idea to go after Trump on. And I do not think their actual objective was to impeach. I think it was to get election stuff after they'd screwed up so badly with Kavanaugh. And
it's also, before we've talked in rather abstract terms about this, but it's worth mentioning that this isn't about Trump Russia. This is about Ukraine. Russia's enemy.
Yeah, the opposite of Russia. If they had a number one enemy, it would be Ukraine in terms of international interactions.
Where there is currently conflict between Russia and anyone is with Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's not with anyone else. That's where there is friction right now, and this is not a proxy war. There is friction between Russia and Ukraine. I am
Tanked.
not sure which side I take on the issue because the media has given totally crooked reporting
Yeah.
on it. So I'm not actually sure who's at fault because they both sound like they've done some pretty damn shady stuff.
Yeah.
But on paper, America is siding with Ukraine because it's traditional to side against the Russians if you're American.
Yeah. It's hard to call because Ukraine is a very obviously corrupt country. As Joe Biden will later point out, he called up the president of Ukraine and said, "You need to fire this prosecutor investigating a company my son works at, or you're not getting your millions of dollars in financial aid." And they fired him because Joe Biden said so, or they weren't getting money. This is on tape. Been on tape forever. Been spread around all the way since this Ukraine thing started. It resurfaced and was spread everywhere. And he said this during the Obama years. It's fairly recent. So yeah. They have completely abandoned Russia at this point until this falls apart. In which case, Russia will come back up because, of course, it will. But first,
Well, it already has. I've seen,
yeah.
them go back to that story of, oh well, I mean, Trump's basically a puppet of Putin.
They repeated it enough to their base that it's a fallback for the Democrats at this point. So first, they try to have Schumer and Nadler handle this, and they are so unpalatable with the public that they get kicked out, and we get pencil neck Adam Schiff, who I do not know where they find these people, and or if just having bad ideas and being corrupt does this physically to your appearance, but it makes you look like a monster. And Adam Schiff looks like a bug crammed into a human costume that has pop-out eyes if you squeeze him too hard.
I see. That's very graphic.
Because he has a very tiny neck, a very round head, and very big bug eyes. I have not gone after anybody's particular appearance here because it hasn't been.
I think you should probably go after Nadler's.
Yeah, but it's relevant here because they specifically got Schumer and Nadler out of doing this when they started to be the ones to head it because they were too unpalatable with the public. They couldn't convince anybody with the way they looked at all. Nadler is a incredibly overweight, slimy-looking man that looks like he's on some kind of...
He looks like the Penguin.
Yeah.
Let's just not put too fine a point on it. He looks like the Penguin from the old Batman movie.
And he's got his belt around his nipples. It's ridiculous. Schumer is Schumer. He just, in general, can't comport himself. While he does not have the same ugliness factor that Nadler does in being the Penguin, he cannot present an idea to the right and not make them think he's lying just by virtue of his mouth moving.
Well, it probably doesn't help that a lot of the right thinks that he's a cannibal now as well.
No, that too. I don't know if we thought that during Ukraine or not, but it's hilarious. So we get pencil neck Adam Schiff, who I've described before. And I don't know why they picked this guy. They could have picked anybody, but I guess Schiff just really wanted it. And so he went for it. And he threw Hail Mary after Hail Mary. And every single Democrat in the House and the Senate did the most ridiculous mental gymnastics you've seen to support this.
I don't know, it didn't really seem to me that they were particularly trying. It just seemed to me like they were assuming everybody already agreed with them.
Yeah, they would just present things as fact that were blatantly not true. Like, I saw one of them, I forget who, just say, oh, it's known that Trump has given favorable positions to Ukraine in the past for during trade deals because they send him money or something. It was some congressman that said something along those lines. I'm like, are you kidding me? And there was no evidence of it at all. And there was some kind of this from every single Democrat that are just blatant lies. Every single Democrat, I think except for Tulsi and one other, blatantly lied during impeachment about stuff they claimed they knew but had no evidence of.
Yeah, it was pretty cringy. But it looked to me, from what I saw of it, it actually looked to me like a performance.
Yeah,
it looked to me like theater. Like they weren't actually holding any kind of hearing. Well, they were just putting on a show.
while a few of the things they said during their performance sounded like threats to the rest of Congress and the American people and made the conservatives tense up a little bit, in general, I remember the entire duration of the thing, Knowles and others that I follow going, come on, let's just get this over with. We know the House is going to vote to impeach on a partisan basis with no evidence. It's going to go to the Senate, and the Senate's going to acquit. Let's just skip to the end. We don't need all this garbage. And, yeah, that, this, Ukraine, I think, blew up in their face harder than they think it did. Because I saw a whole lot more, even more normies. Every time one of these events happens, I see more and more normies wake up to, wow, the Democrat Party is just a bunch of corrupt monsters. And this highlighted it on full display. And instead of being just generic politicians or generic news media, this one put the spotlight on the Democrats themselves. And every single individual Democrat that had to support the impeachment had to personally invest themselves in it by giving some kind of statement. Tulsi abstained. She couldn't go full-throat opposition to this. So she doesn't lose as much points as the rest of the Democrats.
She wanted to run to be the nominee. So.
Yeah, so she did that, but she didn't say anything. There's one other that I forgot. I think one guy flipped. I think this is the event where one Senate Democrat said, or House Democrat said, "This is too much. I can't do it. This is so ridiculous," and he flipped parties to Republican. And Trump endorsed him, and he won his primary now, from what I remember. I forget his name. But somebody that listens to this can email it to us, and I'll correct myself if we ever do another one of these. and yeah, it just highlighted every single Democrat as a liar to people. And I think the personal touch of Ukraine is notable because it put the individuals on spotlight as liars. And they were all Democrats. And yeah. So the other thing it did, it also further highlighted the message discipline of the left, and that the DNC has such a chokehold on their candidates that if they do not toe the party line on every single issue and every single vote like this, they will not be
completely ridiculous.
Yeah, they will not be. They'll be primaried out basically, and they'll put all their funding behind the opponent. And that was the threat that must have gone around. You don't need Oppo research to know that's the case because of the way they behaved. There is no other feasible thing it could have been. It also put good old Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden, not Beau, who is currently Joe's current deflection strategy when it comes to Hunter.
It has been for a long time.
Yeah.
It has been for a long time.
Accusing
Every time
them
that anybody brings up something that Hunter Biden has done, he pretends that
they're talking about Beau.
He's talking about Beau, and then he defends Beau. He does it every time, without fail.
So, Hunter Biden, as mentioned before, had dealings in Ukraine with the Burisma oil and gas company, I think. And they are corrupt as all get out and under investigation by the Ukrainian government right now because they were doing a whole lot of stuff that even Ukraine couldn't handle. So, and he was getting millions and millions of dollars for being a consultant on the board, and he has
he doesn't know anything about Ukraine, and he doesn't know anything about oil and gas.
Yeah.
But he's totally a consultant.
So, this is clear nepotism, and Joe Biden was called out for it, and he has done his best to deflect from it. And while it's rallying in the conservative circles, the media will not let it catch him. Unfortunately, to this day.
But now there's also the new documentary evidence that Hunter Biden received $3.5 million from the wife of the former mayor of Moscow.
Man, if I was the DNC and I was...
Remember that projection thing?
Yeah. Projection. Always a thing with the Democrats. So, as it turns out, they were the ones that were colluding with the Russian and Ukraine governments in the end, like always.
Both Russia and Ukraine. Like, I didn't think it was possible. I thought it didn't make sense because, Russia and Ukraine are enemies. But I guess if you're a Biden, you can actually manage it.
Yeah.
That's how they knew that they could accuse Trump of it, because they tried it themselves. The Bidens are basically a crime family, much like the Clintons.
Yeah. So, predictably, this passes in the House on a totally partisan line, and nobody is surprised by this, but everybody is kind of still in shock with how partisan the Democrats have become. And it moves on to the Senate for a trial. And so the Mitch lets the hearing start for the first day and presents the case. And once everybody finishes making their case, which is just a repeat of Adam Schiff reading literal fan fiction about Trump that he's created from his imagination with no evidence to the entire Senate, the Democrats moved to call for more witnesses to make this a bigger deal to get more campaign footage. Thankfully, this is a lot of points for Ted Cruz especially, and a little bit for Rand Paul. These two went around the entire Republican Party and said, if any of you even think of voting for more witnesses, it is not going to be good for you, and laid out for each and every one that was thinking about squishing why it's a bad idea, and they got everybody, I think, except Romney, that was thinking about squishing to vote against more witnesses.
My goodness.
So, and this is when Cruz started his podcast Verdict, and he does it with Michael Knowles, who is my most consistently listened to conservative commentator at this point. So, I ever since then, I've been quite impressed with Cruz and his attempts to reach out to the people and be transparent with them. And Verdict in its initial days was just supposed to be about impeachments, but then 2020 happened, so he just kind of kept doing it.
2020 is a bit like that.
Yeah. So yeah, we he has won a lot of points with this, and Rand Paul as well. The boy, in no small part, went around with Cruz and helped them. And for all I know, these two were literally beating squishes over the head with file folders or something.
Yeah, despite the fact that I disagree with him on a lot of things, I've got a lot of respect for Rand Paul because he's one of very, very few politicians who have at least attempted to stay, consistent in their policy prescriptions.
And in the face of violence at that, after being the subject to absolutely brutal violence.
Not once, but multiple times, because that's what leftists are all about, basically.
Yeah. And, poor Rand Paul. I like him way better than his dad. But,
well, his dad is kind of a lunatic, but, I mean, his dad was sort of a charming, wacko lunatic, much in the way that Elon Musk is.
But yeah, Rand Paul, over time, has won enough points with me where I would be okay with voting for him as president. I could take him if he was the choice. But, he still is not my ideal. He's a little too far and stuck in his ideological rut and cannot compromise on it. And I think that's a weakness that's too easy to exploit. Even if I do agree with most of the stuff. The joke is he disappears with coronavirus and comes back with a Wolverine beard and all this, and the 1 week he's gone, the Congress passes the most money in a program they've ever passed at once in the history of the United States.
I don't know that there was a way around that, though. I think that the way around that was to not shut the economy down, and they missed that boat.
Mm-hmm. We'll get to that very soon after this. But that's all of the lead up to 2020 I think we want to cover, because we spent way longer than I thought we would on the pre-2020 stuff. And so I'm going to actually, before we get into the coof and stuff, I'm going to cut it here, and we're going to go to me and Vol are going to take a break, go to the bathroom, and get the next segment lined up, and we will cover 2020. This is we may have to compress it down because it is starting to get late, but we will we'll try and get through this as best we can without skimping on anything. So we'll see y'all in a little bit.